In the previous video, we talked about how researcher Robert Bauval proved that the layout of the Giza pyramids matches the layout of Orion's belt in the sky. After extensive study of the pyramid texts, Bauval discovered that the location of the Nile River mimics the Milky Way galaxy, and that the 7 pyramids extending from Abu Rawash to Dashur reflect the distribution of the 7 stars in the sky. Bauval published his findings in a scientific archaeological journal, which sparked the interest of researchers and the general public. In the early 1990s, with the spread of personal computers, Bauval was able to use a program called Sky Globe, which was used by astronomers to find out the positions of stars at any specific time in history or even in the future. By using this program, Bauval was able to calculate the changes in the positions of the celestial constellations over the ages as a result of the Earth's movement, which helped him prove his theory about the relationship between the Giza pyramids and Orion's belt. Through the Sky Globe program, Robert Bauval went back to the era in which the pyramids were supposed to be built, approximately 2500 BC. But he noticed something unusual, an observation that made him wonder, did archaeologists make a mistake in determining the true age of the pyramids? In the 1960s, 2 researchers came up with an important theory, an Egyptologist named Alexander Badawi and an astronomer named Virginia Trimble. It is known that the Great Pyramid has 4 columns. They realized that the 2 holes in the King's Chamber point to Al-Nit, the largest star in Orion's belt, as well as the Serpent Star, while the 2 holes in the Queen's Chamber point to Sirius and the North Star. By their calculations, they found that the star Al-Nitar passed through the shaft of the King's Chamber around 2500 BC, which was one of the reasons why the Great Pyramids were built in 2500 BC. We will see how Bauval exploited this theory. The Sky Globe program is now outdated, but we will use a similar program to observe what caught his attention. The program we will use is Stellarium. It is free and available on all operating systems, including Windows and Apple Mac. It can show the sky and the positions of the stars during 100,000 years BC and AD. When using the program, you must first determine the location on Earth from which you want to watch the stars. We will choose the Giza area where the Giza pyramids are located, but feel free to choose any place in the north of Egypt where the ancient capital of Memphis was. Then you should enter the exact longitude and latitude coordinates that you can get using Google Earth. In both cases, the results will not differ much. Here from the list, we will choose the Giza area. Now it looks like we are standing at the pyramids in 2019. Keep in mind that the program only shows the sky and not the ground, so it will not show the pyramids, but it is supposed to be here. Now we will look to the south. The letter S stands for south. Now the constellations are displayed within the southern part of the sky. These lines were made by the program to make it easier to identify the constellations. Let's go back to 2500 BC by typing 2500 with a minus sign in the date field. This was the sky at that time. We can move the days and months back and forth until Orion and the Milky Way appear in front of us. This is Orion, and this line is the Milky Way. The axis of the pyramids from the horizon is exactly 45 degrees. But Robert noticed that if we draw an imaginary line extending from the column of the King's Chamber, as Trimble and Badawi proved, we will find that the layout of the pyramid does not correspond to the belt of Orion, meaning that the builders connected the columns of the Great Pyramid to the Nodic, but did not connect the same to the other 2 pyramids. There is a big difference in the angles. If you zoom in, you will find a clear slope in the angle. There is below the layout of the pyramids of Giza at an angle of 45 degrees from the horizon, as we have previously stated. But the constellation Orion is at a sharp angle, and this is a big difference. In other words, if the pyramids were built in 2500 BC, they would not have been built in this way, but they would have been built at a sharp angle to correspond to the belt of Orion. At this point, you may be wondering, what if the ancient Egyptians just built 3 pyramids at random angles, and that's it? But here's where we insist. The ancient Egyptians made no mistakes, left nothing to chance, and nothing was built randomly. Every structure was designed with precision, and each angle they chose was for a specific reason. What happens if we decided to change the date a bit? Let's move the date forward to 2400 BC. Now we have even reached 2000 BC and still, there's no match in the layouts. Let's try to move backward in time, say 2600 BC. Even 3000 BC, we have now gone as far back as 3500 BC when the Egyptian civilization had supposedly begun in its known form, yet there's no match. But Robert noticed that the angle difference decreases as we go back in time. He began to wonder if the pyramids were dated correctly. To answer this, he asked another question. How was the Egyptian civilization dated in its beginning? He began looking for answers in many books. Champollion, who established the rules for deciphering hieroglyphs, believed that Egyptian civilization began in 5867 BC, starting with the First Dynasty. Later, the German archaeologist Karl Lepsius pushed the date back to 3892 BC. Then, Auguste Mariette, founder of the Egyptian Museum, pushed it back to 5004 BC. His colleague Dr. Brugsch pushed it back to 4400 BC. Finally, it became 3200 BC, the date that most scholars today accept as the beginning of Egyptian civilization, when the two kingdoms were united by King Menes-Narmer and the beginning of the First Dynasty. To this date, there is a great discrepancy between theories and dates between references. That is why you sometimes find C or CA before dates in some books, as they represent circa, which means approximate. This indicates that the date is approximate and not accurate, as there is no concrete evidence to rely on for the date. It is all speculation and estimates, and each book is different. The real question here is, did the ancient Egyptians leave us any documents related to the beginning of their civilization? In the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy, there is one of the most important papyrus texts, which was acquired by the Italian explorer Dravetti in the 19th century. The papyrus is unfortunately torn, and we do not know whether this happened before or after its discovery. This papyrus includes the names of more than 340 Egyptian kings. Their reigns begin with a period called the Age of the Gods, which extended to 7,000 years. To this day, no one knows what the Age of the Gods means and what it represents. If this papyrus were complete, it would be the most important papyrus in the entire history of Egypt. Egyptologist Dr. Selim Hassan commented in his encyclopedia that this papyrus mentions several kings about whom we know nothing. Herodotus mentioned that according to the Egyptian priests, 340 kings reigned in Egypt in 11,340 years. Do you notice the duration? The other documents estimating the age of Egyptian civilization were established by Manetho, a highly educated Egyptian priest whom Ptolemy II asked to tab and date the history of ancient Egypt. Manetho used texts and registries from the templates as his references. The original Egyptian copy of Manetho's book was sadly lost in the Alexandrian Library Grand Fire, which was in the Roman period. Luckily, some historians copied excerpts from Manetho's scripts. Some of the excerpts indicated that the tabbing and grouping of the Egyptian civilization doesn't end at 3000 BC, but rather at almost 30,000 BC. Eusebius of Caesarea mentioned that according to Manetho, there were 3 periods before the dynasties, which some people mistakenly refer to as the pharaohs. Those 3 periods are the demigods, Shemsu-Hor or Horus followers, and pre-dynastic kings, extending over a total of 28,000 years. Eusebius even doubted Manetho's storyline, claiming that he meant 28,000 months and not years. In another disclosure by the Sicilian historian Diodorus, he mentioned that according to Manetho, Egypt's history extends to more than 33,000 years before Menes. This means that according to Diodorus, the age of the Egyptian civilization extends to 36,000 BC. Other historians mention similar timelines indicating the date of the civilization exceeds tens of thousands of years. So if we look to the timeline of Egyptian history, starting with the birth of Christ, before that was the Roman period, and before was the Ptolemaic and the Dynastic period, and then before were different sets of communities scattered without a central government like Naqada, Badari, and others. And before this was supposedly the prehistoric period, which we know nothing about. The approximate timeline of ancient Egypt, based on the Turin King List, Manetho and the Greek historians, in which the followers of Horus, the kings of the covenant, the age of the venerables, and the age of the gods, are ignored as if they never existed. As we now know, this papyrus has been mentioned by respected Egyptologists, such as Dr. Selim Hassan, Dr. Ahmed Fakhri, and others. So it is clear that we are not talking about an unknown or secret papyrus here. There's a clear contradiction between the dates from Manetho, Turin Papyrus, and the current history books that shrink the Egyptian history into only 3,000 years of civilization, and attribute the pyramids, obelisks, temples, statues, and all other artifacts to only the dynastic period. It seems that all the considered dates set in the past 200 years by the early European Egyptologists were biased by religious beliefs. In other words, the age of the Egyptian civilization is not supposed to be more than 6,000 years old, according to the biblical timeline. And if there were any differences in the true timeline, according to Manetho's followers, it might have happened due to either some calendar discrepancies or personal opinions. Inevitably, there are several periods in Egyptian history that we know absolutely nothing about, and that the true age of the Egyptian civilization is not 3,000 years old, but exceeds tens of thousands of years old. All these pieces of information were in front of Robert Bauval, whilst investigating the age of the pyramids, how clearly the age of the entire Egyptian civilization was not based on any solid evidence, and how our entire understanding of ancient Egypt has been restricted to only the dynastic period or just a little bit before it. In this case, it's quite possible that the age of the pyramids is older than 2500 BC, and that's why the angles are not mirrored. The constellation of Orion wasn't even facing the pyramids. Now let's return to the program and go even further back in time. We'll try to take it back to the prior 3500 BC. We'll face the sky from the south of the Giza pyramids and start going backward. Now, there's a match. The pyramids of Giza face Orion's belt at 45 degrees to the horizon. The Nile River faces the Milky Way at 9 degrees, but the year is 10,500 BC. 10,500 BC is the earliest date for which the pyramids of Giza matched Orion's belt. Bauval's friend Graham Hancock was with him during this experiment. He shouted at Bauval and reminded him of the criticism they received when they mentioned the connection between the pyramids and Orion's belt. Now imagine the difficulties they would face if they announced that the pyramids were more than 10,000 years old. How inconvenient would it be to say that the exact date of the pyramids is 10,500 BC? Maybe there is something wrong with the calculations of this program. We tried another program. It is the same result. Even with a third program, the result is always 10,500 BC. This means that the builders of the pyramids actually recorded their age in a way that cannot be falsified or canceled. Taking everything into account, ancient Egyptian history should be rewritten because there is a clear indication that the age of ancient Egyptian civilization precedes the currently confirmed history by several thousand years. Moreover, the builders of the pyramids are not necessarily from the dynastic period. They seem to be from a much older time, and perhaps the dynastic period was just like ours. It came while the pyramids were historically being built. In short, the first time the pyramids were aligned with Orion's belt and the Nile with the Milky Way was in 10,500 BC, which is the age of the pyramids. In 1994, Robert Bauval published his theory in his book, The Orion Mystery, which caused a huge stir and was a bestseller in the UK at the time. But academic Egyptologists rejected the theory and refused to even discuss it. They accused Bauval of ignorance, fantasy, and seeking attention. On several TV shows, Dr. Zahi Hawass refused to even discuss the theory or discuss it in detail, mocked the author, and stated that reading such a book is a waste of time.
Dr. Hawass, you have to admit, the position of the pyramids is just like the position of the stars of Orion.
It's an imagination, it's fantasy. The man is not basing his theory on any archaeological or philological evidence at all. The man is an amateur. The man should go and teach in a children's school, but he cannot write on pyramids. Tell me his CV, his education. What kind of education did he have?
Engineering?
I don't think that he never really got an education. I don't think so.
Have you never read the Orion Mystery or the Keeper of Genesis?
I don't waste my time. You know, I am a man, I'm a scientist.
But with all due respect to Dr. Zahi Hawass, how can one criticize a book that he has not read? We have lost a lot behind this controversy, and the discussion has turned into a personal refutation. Mr. Antoine Boutros attributed in his book The Secret of the Great Pyramid. Academics rejected this theory for two main reasons. First, it is well agreed among Egyptologists that the pyramids are part of a religious belief linked to the sun. The sides of the pyramids resemble the rays of the sun, and the pyramids are platforms for taking off to help the king on his journey to the sun and join Ra on his journey using the solar boats. The pyramids are built on the west bank of the Nile corresponding to sunset, meaning the symbol of death. Everything mentioned means the relationship between the pyramids and the sun. On the other hand, Bauval's theory links the pyramids to the stars, proving that the pyramids were built on the west bank of the Nile, and not for the sunset, but to represent the stars west of the Milky Way, and proving that the builders of the pyramids were of the religion of the stars and not the sun. Such findings would weaken the theory that the pyramids were built in the Dynastic era. Secondly, Bauval's theory that the pyramids were built before 10,000 BC would dismantle everything written in Egyptology during the past 200 years. Thousands of papers, magazines, books, and documentaries would have to be reconsidered, not only about Egyptian history, but about the history of the entire world. As mentioned, the ancient Egyptian civilization, according to Manetho, extends back thousands of years before the dynastic period, and it is very likely that the builders of the pyramids were from some earlier era. Either the demigods, Shemsu Hor, the age of the venerables, or some other unknown period for that matter. Some may ask, why not use the method of carbon-14 dating to determine the exact age of the pyramids and relieve ourselves of the guesswork? The age determination using carbon-14 dating was discovered in the 1940s and is still used to date excavations. Determining the age of an item using carbon-14 can only be done on organic material from an excavation. It could be hair or bone from a mummy, or even just wood or food remnants. If there are no organic materials found, then C14, unfortunately, cannot be used to identify the age of an artifact. Thus, when C14 tests are performed, they cannot be performed on rocks, but only on any surrounding organic material. In regards to the famous Egyptologist Dr. Mark Lehner, on his website was a prolonged interview on C14. Dr. Mark Lehner believes that the pyramids were built around 2500 BC. He claims that there's no easy way to determine the age of the pyramids using C14. On that note, what do you think they did when they tried to determine the age of the pyramids using C14? They measured the age of the solar boats because they were made of wood, an organic material. They also measured potteries with dried food remnants around the pyramids. Not to mention also measuring spikes of wood stuck between the rocks of the pyramids, since rocks are not organic. The solar boats, food debris, and also the skeletons found around the pyramids all were determined to be of the age between 2500 BC to 3000 BC, as several periods went by around the pyramids. And things they found, including workers' tombs, could be after the pyramids were built, and there's no solid proof to link them to the construction of the pyramids. In the Nubian Museum in Aswan, a very rare artifact was found. An ostrich egg from the Naqada dynasty was found circa 4500 BC. This egg was discovered in one of the tombs in 1907. If we take a closer look, we'll find a drawing of 3 pyramids that look like the Giza pyramids and a river like the Nile. If you take a look at the pyramids from the south, you will find that the three pyramids are on the west bank of the Nile and that their sequence is identical to that on the egg. If you take a look at the pyramids from the south, you will find that the three pyramids are on the left bank of the Nile and that their sequence is identical to that on the egg. We'll also find that the river drawn on the egg is wide at the north and narrow at the south, which mirrors the Nile. The museum's explanatory plaque says it dates back to 4,500 BC. The official opinion is that it is just a coincidence and does not represent the Giza pyramids. Many people, amateurs and professionals, had the same doubts about the egg, and all insisted that this egg is living proof that the pyramids are much older than their declared age. We have seen Bauval's theory, the Turin papyrus, the Manetho documents, the ostrich egg, and many other findings that have not been mentioned for the sake of the length of this video, but will be discussed in the upcoming episodes, all of which date the age of the pyramids and ancient Egyptian civilization back several thousand years before their currently documented age. Although this theory is very popular and believed by many people around the world, it is still officially rejected. This means that by the time King Narmer united the two kingdoms into one kingdom around 3200 BC, the pyramids were already in existence thousands of years earlier. Thanks for watching and see you next time.